Earlier this year, Sonic Unleashed received a fan-made recompilation PC port, finally allowing the game to run natively on modern computers. And as a self-proclaimed Unleashed Enthusiast, this has been a dream come true. This new PC port does a lot of things for Unleashed. It allows the game to run at higher resolutions and frame rates, offers some quality of life options like turning off the battle music in night stages, enables future modding opportunities like custom stages and model swaps, and most importantly, gives you less of a reason to buy a modern Xbox. I'm sorry, they're charging how much? There's a lot of exciting things that are made possible through this recomp, but the mod support is what I'm most excited about personally. Unleashed modding has sort of been a thing for a while now, but since you needed to have either a hacked Xbox or a PC powerful enough to run Xenia, its modding scene wasn't as popular as something like Generations. Thankfully, this new port makes modding much more accessible, and bypasses some of the limitations previous modding attempts had, which means we're slowly starting to see more and more quality mods for the game, and I'm really excited to see where they go in the future. Overall, this PC port has been a dream come true. It's still Sonic Unleashed through and through, and thankfully there were no major bugs introduced in the transition to PC. Well, never mind I guess. Between all the new graphics options, achievement support, and quality of life additions, this PC port is probably my new favorite way to play Unleashed. With the port's release, a lot more people have been checking out the game recently, some for the first time and others replaying it for the first time in years, so a lot of the discussion around the game has been reignited, so to speak. A lot of it is stuff that we as Sonic fans are already familiar with. Unleashed is the best looking Sonic game, Eggman Land is too long, why is Sonic a werewolf, that kind of stuff. But the discourse that keeps catching my eye are the conversations surrounding the Sun and Moon medals. These things have always been a little contentious, but recently I've been seeing a lot of talk saying that they completely ruined the game's pacing, and that it would be better off without their inclusion. I don't really agree with this sentiment. I find that a lot of the talking points surrounding the Sun and Moon medals are overblown at best, or just flat out malicious at worst. I'd go as far to say that they actually add a lot more to the experience than they take away, and the game as a whole would be worse with their removal. So I thought I'd take a moment and look at the common critiques of Unleashed medal system, and explore how some of them are exaggerated, which ones have some merit to them, and ultimately how the collectibles affect Unleashed as a whole. For those who aren't familiar with Sonic Unleashed, the Sun and Moon medals are collectibles that are scattered around various parts of the game. You can find them in both day and night stages, hub worlds, entrance stages, boss fights, and in some of the town missions. There's 400 total medals in the game, split into 200 Sun medals and 200 Moon medals, and they're required to open each of the game's stages. Mechanically, they're very similar to the green stars in Super Mario 3D World or the gears in Kirby's Return to Dreamland. They're scattered around various parts of the game and they want you to explore and chip away at them while heading towards the goal. Every mandatory day and night stage have the same amount of medals in them. Day stages contain 3 Sun medals and 7 Moon medals each, while night stages contain 10 Sun medals and 6 Moon medals. Collecting medals of each type contributes to your Sun and Moon level, the progress of which you can check on the status screen in the pause menu, and at the end of stages whenever you're allocating your EXP. Not only does this screen tell you what your current level is, but you can also see how many of each medal you need to reach the next rank. There's 7 levels for your Sun and Moon ranking. They'll start out increasing every 15 medals of each type you collect up until you reach level 5, which then increases the requirement to 20 medals to reach level 6, and then finally it increases one more time to 40 medals to reach level 7. You only need to collect a total of 120 medals to reach the maximum level, so there's more wiggle room than you'd initially expect. Some players tend to hit a point where they don't have the required medal level to open the next mandatory stage, which forces them to backtrack to previous stages to look for more medals to unlock it, leading to some frustration. A common complaint I see about the medals is that they're antithetical to the game's design, specifically for the high-speed focused day stages, since you have to stop and painstakingly tiptoe through each stage to find all of them. While that perspective makes sense on paper, in practice the medals for the day stages are actually laid out in a pretty organic way. If you look at how each of the medals are laid out in every stage, I would argue a majority of them actually enhance the game's level design, instead of taking away from it by rewarding exploration and trying out different level paths. To better showcase what I mean, I've gone ahead and separated the 80 medals in the mandatory day stages into 3 different categories, based on how easy they are to find in a normal run of the stage. The first category are what I like to call the plain sight medals. These are medals that you're almost guaranteed to spot while playing through the stage for the first time. A lot of these medals are placed directly in the middle of the mandatory path. You'll see most of the medals in this category without having to go out of your way for them, and a good handful are actually forced upon you in automated set pieces. In total, I counted 33 of these medals. The second category are the alternate path medals. These are typically placed on one of the stage's branching paths. These medals are often still fairly simple to see as long as you're paying attention, but considering not everyone will take the same exact path during these sections, it's not guaranteed that they'll see them. There are a total of 38 of these medals. The final category of medals are what I like to call, what the fuck were they thinking? These are medals that are tucked away in a place I think it's fair to say very few people would think to stop and look. They often require you to stop dead in your tracks to explore an area well off the beaten path, in areas you might not think you can even go into. For example, there's a section in Aptos where you have to go into this little alleyway to find a moon medal in a courtyard. There are medals in both Holoska and Shamar that require you to jump into what looks like a bottomless pit to find them. And then there's this one in Adabat where you have to take Sonic out of bounds to get to this little inlet to find another moon medal. These are pretty egregious. Whenever you see people talk about how bad the medals are, these are usually the ones they look to prove their point. Thankfully, this category has the least amount of medals by far at a total of 9. I tried to be pretty objective when categorizing each medal, but the exact numbers might vary slightly from person to person. For example, there's these 2 medals near the beginning of Rooftop Run that are sort of tucked behind a corner that could arguably fall into the 3rd category, but I still thought they were pretty easy to spot as you're running past, so I left them in category 2. I don't think the total numbers would change too much, but I thought I would mention that just for the sake of transparency. With that being said, when you look at the number of medals in every category, it becomes clear that the vast majority of the medals are actually pretty easy to find. A little under half of the 80 total medals in these stages are placed in plain sight on the main parts of the levels everyone has to go through. You might have to do a little exploring across different level paths to find the rest of them, but more often than not they're still placed in a spot that's easy to grab once you do see them. So with all of that laid out, we can finally discuss whether or not these medals are actually antithetical to the day stage's design. In my opinion, no, they're not. You can find about 80% of them just by playing the stages the way they were intended, as long as you make sure to check different pathways every now and then. While it is true that there's a few medals that are stupid hidden, these medals are the exception and not the rule. These medals only account for around 10% of the total available. Even if you don't agree with the exact number I came up with while categorizing everything, when you look at all of the individual medal placements, I think it's hard to argue that a majority of them are obtuse. You could maybe argue the mere existence of these stupid medals might make the player feel they need to tiptoe through a level to find everything, but I don't think this would realistically be an issue unless someone is going for 100%. Not every stage has one of these types of medals, and in the ones that do, they only account for 1 or 2 of the total amount. A normal player isn't likely going to find these hidden medals on a normal playthrough, so in the case someone is going back to previous stages to hunt for medals, I'd argue most people would get fed up hunting for just 1 medal after a tiny bit, and move on to a stage that has more available. These stages are very clearly designed with the medal system in mind. A majority of the medals are extremely easy to spot, if not outright given to you for free. In fact, I'd say a little under half of the medals in every stage are basically handed to you, so I don't think it's asking too much to grab the few extra you'll spot along the way, especially when they're right there. You could argue that having to stop and grab them if you miss one is a pain, and while I do sort of agree, once you grab a medal, it's yours forever, even if you die or leave the stage. So I don't really see how it's that big of a deal to grab it once and be done with it. What I like about the medals is that they add to each stage's replayability and feed into the day stage's feedback loop. They act not only as extrinsic reasons for the player to want to replay the level once or twice, but also as positive reinforcement, since a lot of these medals are placed in the more advanced pathways, so they often showcase faster routes that can help newer players learn the stage for a better time and rank. While there still are a few on lower routes, they are much less common, so the medals act as an incentive to both play better and replay the stages, especially once you get some new abilities that make the medals easier to grab or open new shortcuts. The BS out of the way medals are very few and far between, so if you're paying attention, it's not hard to get at least 50 to 70% of each stage's medals in one go. I don't think it's unrealistic to expect players to play the day stages more than once in a normal playthrough, especially since they're often cited as the good part of the game. These stages are designed for replayability, so I don't think it's out of the question for players to find a majority of the medals organically while trying for a better time or rank. If the day stages were the only place to get medals in this game, I'd probably knock this system a lot more, but as it happens, there's an entire other half of the game that's purpose-built for medal hunting. While it's pretty easy to get medals while playing the day stages normally, they're by far the least efficient way to grind medals. The best place to get them are easily the night stages. The Werehog's playstyle is tailor-made around slower-paced combat and exploration, so it's only natural that the medals would be easier to find in that setting. This is even enforced by the game itself, since these stages have way more medals than their daytime counterparts. The night stages have a total of 128 medals up for grabs, compared to the 80 available in the day stages. Because of this, I'd say it's a lot easier to efficiently and naturally medal hunt in these night stages. That's not to say they're super easy to find, but they often feel more intuitive than their daytime counterparts. A lot of the medals are placed in small side areas, platforming sections, or in various cracks and crevices behind doors, staircases, and other environmental objects. There's only a few that I'd label as tricky to find. As long as you're thorough, it's more than possible to find most, if not all, of the medals in one run. The slower paced nature of these stages makes them ripe for medal hunting, and the balance between medal searching, platforming, and combat is what I think makes the Werehog stages really fun to play. So as you can see, it's pretty easy to organically find medals throughout the mandatory stages of Sonic Unleashed. While everything we've talked about so far has been mostly the main stages, there's still a couple extra places to find medals outside of them as well. Most countries have a couple different side acts to play that have their own share of medals, albeit a lower amount. These stages have 1 sun medal and 2 moon medals for their day counterparts, and 4 sun medals and 1 moon medal for the night ones. And while unfortunately not every continent has the same amount of bonus acts, thanks to their shorter length, their medals are often way easier to find than normal, making them great spots for essentially free medals for those who are looking for them. On top of those, you can find a number of medals in the hub worlds too. Most hub worlds have 2 of each type hidden in them, while Spagonia and Shamar have 4 of each type due to their size. And then on top of that, each one of the entrance stages has 2 more of each type to grab. Boss fights also have their own set of easily obtainable medals. The night bosses especially are great because they're small enclosed areas, so even if you miss them on your first time, you can run in, grab them, and then leave the stage immediately. The day bosses can be a little annoying since they're all auto runners, so it can be hard to see the medals coming sometimes, but it's still way quicker to grab these than playing a normal stage. Finally, you can also get medals from various side activities. There's a handful of town missions you can partake in that sometimes have 1 or 2 medals, and you can buy souvenirs in every continent to give them to Professor Pickle, who will occasionally give you a sun or moon medal, for a total of 6 of each type. Sonic Unleashed is really good at giving you countless opportunities to chip away at the medal requirements, even when you're not playing a main stage. In a perfect world, this would be more than enough to make them manageable in a normal playthrough. However, in practice, their implementation admittedly does leave a little bit to be desired. Sonic Unleashed is far from the only platformer that requires collectibles to progress throughout the game. So what does this game do differently that sets it apart for the worse? I think the biggest issue around the medal system as a whole is a lack of communication. Let's look at Super Mario 3D World again for a second. That game also locks level progression behind a collectible, in this case the green stars, but the key difference I think is how that information is portrayed to the player. At the end of the first world, the boss level is blocked by a gate that the player has to have a certain number of green stars to unlock. The requirement is fairly small, so it's likely that the player will already have reached the threshold needed, but the game still goes out of its way to stop the player and highlight the utility of the green stars. This is built upon again a few stages later when a regular stage is also blocked off by a green star requirement, further incentivizing the player to collect as many as possible. There's no point like this in Sonic Unleashed, where the game stops to specifically or implicitly tell you that the medals are important for progression. Heck, it wasn't even until this playthrough where I was specifically looking out for it that I realized how the sun and moon levels work. There is an NPC in Aptos that tells you about the medals and the level system, but it's buried behind a couple different dialogue trees tied to the entrance stages, so it's not guaranteed that every player will see it. The medals might be fairly easy to grab in a vacuum, but if the player doesn't know their importance, they won't feel particularly pressured to collect them, meaning they might choose to pass them up if they're not forced upon you in an automated section. This means that if, or more likely when, a player hits a roadblock because they don't have enough medals, it can feel cheap and frustrating to then have to turn around and leave the area to go and find some more. If the game made it more clear as to what the sun and moon medals do and why they're important, it would make the player feel more pressured to naturally seek them out in stages, or go out of their way to play the extra acts before they're forced to. Then you come to the issue of the level requirements themselves. In general, I think the level requirements are pretty fair. The last night stage requires a moon level of 6, which only requires 80 moon medals to reach. That's less than half of the total amount in the game, so I think it's reasonable to ask someone to collect that many in a normal playthrough. If you've talked to anybody who's hit one of these roadblocks before, there's usually one specific stage that's the culprit: Atabat Day. Atabat Day has the highest medal requirement out of any stage in the game. It requires a sun level of 7, in other words 120 sun medals. Now on the surface, I think it makes sense that you need more sun than moon medals to complete the game. Despite there being the same total amount of both sun and moon medals, the night stages have significantly more sun medals to collect, 10 total versus the 3 available in day stages. And since exploration is a key part of those stages, I don't think it's unreasonable to assume the player will collect more sun medals than moon medals in a normal playthrough. But even with that caveat, Atabat Day requiring a sun level of 7 is an outlier, because it's the highest requirement in the entire game, higher than even the 2 bonus stages you unlock after beating it. Given that context, it's a little hard to defend Atabat Day having such a requirement. People like to say the entire medal system was added to pad out the game time, and this is the only place where I can see that perspective. I can't really think of a good reason as to why the stages you unlock after the required one would have a lower medal requirement, unless they were swapped around last minute to squeeze a little more out of the game's runtime. But having said all of that, I don't think the medals in Sonic Unleashed are nearly as bad as people make them out to be. While there are a handful of medals that are placed in dumb locations, as a whole, I believe they're placed in locations that are often easy to spot as long as you're paying attention and sticking to the higher pathways. A lot of the frustration comes from the fact that the game isn't very clear about their importance until it's too late, making players feel almost betrayed by the game's incompetence. I've always had severe collectathon brain rot, so even as a kid, I went out of my way to collect as many of these as possible, but I can totally sympathize with being frustrated at not being able to progress because you didn't know you needed to collect them in the first place. That being said, I can't agree that the game would be better without their inclusion. I've seen some people propose that the game would be better if they had instead used the medal system from Unleashed. In that version, medals are tied to your final rank in day stages, and a small list of objectives in night stages. While I like this system in the context of that version of the game, I don't think it's something you can lift wholesale into the HD version and call it a day. It works in Unleashed because that game is more arcadey in nature. Ranks in the daytime stages are entirely time-based, which does affect how the level design is laid out. And in the Werehog's case, there's much less of a focus on exploration in lieu of platforming and a simple beat-em-up loop. The medals are also entirely optional in that version of the game, and are only used to unlock bonus rooms in the Gaia gates. Removing the medals wholesale from the HD version stages would do a lot more harm than good, I feel. Just like the night stages are designed for slower exploration and platforming, the day stages are designed for constant replayability for better times and scores, and the medal placement in each stage reflects this. The day stages have a majority of their medals placed on pathways you'd find naturally while experimenting for faster routes, and the night stages have tons of cracks and crevices to tuck medals away into to encourage thorough exploration. I believe removing the medals as a whole would hurt this gameplay loop. Even something as simple as making them optional would completely kill a lot of the extrinsic reasons to explore and fully interact with this game's stages, and it's why I've never really agreed with this line of thinking. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't ways that they can be improved or reworked though. If Unleashed were ever to get a remaster, or God forbid a remake, there are a couple of things they could do to improve the medals. There's really only 2 big things that I can think of that need to happen in the event this game gets re-released. For one, they need to make it crystal clear that the medals are important and are required to unlock stages. Maybe when you get to the first night level you can see it's locked, But then Chip points you to a moon medal near the level portal, which he then uses to unlock the level when you collect it, or make it to where to even play a level you have to spend medals to unlock it like in 3D World. That way you're taught why the medals are important and why you should collect them, but also illustrate that Chip is tied to both the medals and the Gaia gates, kinda like how he unlocks doors and hub areas of Unleashed. The other thing they could do is maybe lower the level requirement for Adabat Day from Sun level 7 down to 6. This would lower the total amount of Sun medals you need to 80, and they'd also need to adjust the level requirements for some of the side acts, because otherwise there's no reason to get the max Sun or Moon level. This, coupled with the importance of the medals being more pronounced, I think would be enough to get people to pay more attention to them, and lower the risk of hitting roadblocks like in the current version of the game. I don't know if I'd want them to do much more than that though, since I like the way they're implemented now. Maybe they could give the medals a small score bonus, kind of like the red rings and colors, to further incentivize the player to collect them, as long as they adjust the score requirements accordingly. I know I argued against the idea of bringing the medal system from Unleashed over, but maybe they could combine it with the existing system to meet some sort of middle ground. Maybe instead of replacing the current structure outright, they could just remove the handful of medals that are in out-of-the-way locations and tie them to rankings instead. Since there's so few of them to begin with, the game would probably be better off with their removal. But then you run the risk of needing to lower the ranking requirements, since they're technically mandatory now, which I would really not want to happen since I love how hard getting an S rank is in this game, so it really just depends on how they implement it. But hopefully this video was able to shed a new light on the Unleashed medal system. I think they add a lot to Unleashed despite their reputation, so I'd really hate to see them removed outright. They do a great job of extrinsically motivating the player and pushing them to play well, and as such they contribute a lot to the game's gameplay loop. And in a way, I think the medals work to enhance the world adventure vibe the game is going for. Unleashed is a game that isn't afraid to tell you to slow down and smell the roses every once in a while, and I think the medals are the perfect representation of that philosophy. What better way to sell the idea of a globetrotting adventure than asking you to interact with every facet of the game's world, whether that's through the game's story and characters, or through its expertly designed environments.